You have now tapped in with the introspective father and son duo. Last name may be strange, but never strangers to the game. Adjust the listening devices and keep it loud.
Coming in, flex. I just wanna win, LABB, who we running with, 2233, I'm on 10 again, state your name.
Hello and welcome to another installment of No Strangers to the Game. Today we're going to be discussing mine and my father's upbringing and their similarities and differences. If for those of you who do not know, me and my father were both raised in the same area, a small valley in Southern California called the Coachella Valley, specifically Indio, a small city in the valley. And so today we're going to be talking about the similarities and differences in the way we were raised, because obviously a different relation of time. So same area, but a very different time frame. So to jump right into it today, I wanted to ask you, what's your most memorable childhood experience growing up, where we did?
For me, the most memorable experiences was the time being around family, particularly in the summers when we would go to the park. We would go out to Lake Cahuilla and we would all be together, from grandmothers down to, infants and everywhere in between. We would be out playing volleyball, we'd be swimming, playing baseball, basketball. We'd have the music playing. And that's why, when you hear me playing Earth, Wind, and Fire and all those old school songs in those groups, that's what it puts me in the frame of mind of those experiences and the nostalgia of being around family. And that music was, at that time, it just put you in a mood. You felt like everything was good, and I feel that way now when I turn that music on. If I come home, I'm in a certain mood, I put the music on and it instantly changes my mood. It instantly put me in a state of mind of peace and calm and resolve. And so those are the most memorable moments, is being with family and those interactions and seeing them playing cards and dominoes and laughing and joking and just, hanging around and just, having that experience. How about you?
Yeah, a couple similarities actually I wanted to draw real quick to yours. Lake Cahuilla has a very different feel for me. Lake Cahuilla is a lake where we live. You can fish, swim, kayak or rowboat, whatever, and all of those things that he spoke of. But for some reason, when I was growing up, all we did was fish there, and we never caught anything. So my memories of Lake Cahuilla are a bit different. I guess it's still good times because I was fishing with family or what have you, but man, it was just sometimes frustrating. So I think that's a funny difference. Maybe it's changed since, you were growing up. But also in the music, I think it's funny because it has the same effect on me. And I think that's most likely because, like you said, you come home and you play it and then that gets you in a good mood. And now I'm like, okay, well, everything's fine. Ever since I was a kid, that music almost signified like, oh, good times, relax or whatever. Like you said, just calming, feel to it. And so it's kind of represented the same thing to me. I don't play it. I guess I don't play it on my own. You know what I mean? I don't walk into my apartment here and turn on some Earth, Wind, and Fire. But I think and it's funny because I think that musical influence that you had or that I had growing up from you is present in the music that I listen to today. And I think you've noticed that too, is a lot of the same feel to it in the music that I listen to today. But no, for me, my most memorable childhood experience is really similar to yours actually too. It involves family, and it really goes back to, I think, spending time with my cousins, because you had siblings and cousins you grew up with. They all had kids, and so we're fairly around the same age. So me and my cousins and my older sister, we all spent a lot of time at my grandma's house, your mother's house. We call her Nan. And so we all grew up going there. She lived, down the street from the Boys and Girls Club. We'd all watch the Boys and Girls Club and spend time there together. So that's probably my most memorable and fun childhood experience, is just being around all my cousins and kids my age, so to speak, and just having a good time doing whatever. And, Nan would have people over, and it would be kind of the same feel. She'd play her Al Green. She loved Al Green. And it kind of had that same feel to it. There was food, family, and music. And that was really, so it's kind of the same experience. And that's the most memorable thing about growing up where we did. And I think that leads to my next point of where we grew up. It's a very small town feel. It's not like a huge city or anything. And because our family's been there for, a few generations now, we have a a big group of us there, a big family group. And so I think it is a bit different than when you grew up, because you guys were all really almost on one street. You know what I mean? Everybody was on that one street.
But we on the whole neighborhood. It wasn't a street. I mean, literally the neighborhood, Nairobi, where I grew up, the streets were named after African countries.
Yeah.
I don't know if that was done intentionally for us or somebody else who thought it would be funny. We had 3 streets in which the neighborhood existed of, and pretty much every street, on every corner, I either had family, I had aunts and grandparents, cousins. So everywhere we went, it was family, and friends. And it was just, you go out and it was like an extension of your own home. And that's what made it fun. It also made it to where you had to really make sure you went out there tripping and cutting up, because the neighbor could get you, your aunt down the street could get you. And then once they call home to your mama, she was going to get you. And so it kept us in line, held us accountable. And it wasn't like it is today, where parents seem to be unwilling to allow other people to discipline their children. It was just like, you out in the street, you cutting up, that's where we're going to get you. And so if you're going to act up in the street, we're going to catch you in the street, and we're going to eliminate some of that nonsense. And so when we decided we're going to act up, we at least went away from the adults, places where we thought nobody could see us doing the things that we shouldn't have been doing. Unlike today, I see kids, they'll go and start cursing and talking real foul in front of adults and elderly people, which is, I find, finally disrespectful.
Yeah. No, and that's one of the differences I wanted to talk about. So obviously, like I said, you grew up on really like one block, like you said, or one kind of neighborhood. But I grew up in, like I said, a small town. And so I felt like I had a lot of family around. They may have been, 10 minutes, around the way, or, a different neighborhood across town or something. But it's not like we lived in such a big area that it wasn't hard to get to them. And in comparison to the kids that I grew up with, I felt like, I had family everywhere. Like, they were all over the place. I couldn't get away from them. And so it's a huge difference from the way you were, because you literally couldn't get away from them. How do you think growing up the way you did, and then it being a little different, but still somewhat, I think, around each other? What do you think are some of those major differences that we've kind of dealt with? Because I can't speak to your experience. I don't know what it was like to literally live with aunts, uncles, and family next door or right across the street or what have you, but I still felt like I had family really close and nearby.
Yeah, the family aspect, like I said, it felt comforting. You felt a sense of security and safe, but you also knew that I couldn't go out here and start acting a fool, because somebody was going to see me, and if they didn't get me, they was going to call my mama, and that was going to be a problem, because Nan, as you know her now, she's really relaxed and laid back, because Nan used to catch us in the store, and she wouldn't even have to look. We'd be asking for something, messing and touching stuff that we weren't supposed to be touching, and she wouldn't even have to turn around and look. She'd just reach out and slap you, and you just looking up, and all of a sudden you catch attention, and you was good for the rest of the day, at least for the rest of the time in the store. Whereas I've had many times just get caught, minding my business, thinking that, okay, I'm touching stuff, and she already told us before we get in the store, don't ask for nothing, don't touch nothing. And we get in there and we do just the opposite. And it never failed. We would get slapped. Me and my sister Serena, we were, within 11 months apart. And so we were pretty close. And we had a lot of times where we got into some stuff. But it was great, man. I love growing up in the childhood. The only thing I would change is if I had a little more to do in the space that we were in. I love being around family and doing the things that we did. We went out in the desert, shot BB guns, and threw rocks at each other, rode bikes, played football. We would ride across town because at that time, it was a lot more safe. We didn't have a lot of the stuff that's happening now, where we're a little uncomfortable allowing our children to go out and do those things. So for me, I had a blast. It was very fun and creative, and if I could do it again, I don't think I would change much, other than just having a little more places or things that we had out here to do. So
I think the one thing I would change is I would have liked our, like I said, that cousin group that I had at a really young age, probably up until around 10. I would have liked it to kind of continued as I got older. And obviously there was room for outside friends. I had, the neighborhood that I grew up in was mainly Latinx community. It wasn't a ton of blacks. There was really one black kid that I knew, and even he left, the neighborhood when I was probably went to middle school. And so I didn't grow up that way. And it's tough to say I missed it because I never had it really. I had one black kid, but it wasn't like I was just in a gang of, of people who looked like me, kids that were probably family related or at least knew their family. And we all just riding around, having fun in the desert or whatever. I didn't have that, so I can't say I missed it. I felt like I, saw my cousins when I did. We had good times or what have you. But I do think that's one thing that I look back and I say, I wish that had continued a little longer. People kind of splintered off, got older, started doing their own thing, which is, understandable and everything. But I just wish that we still found time to kind of come together and spend time together.
Yeah. And another thing that we had that I think differs from today is we didn't have the technology. We didn't have access to all that. I mean, I think when I was about 9 or 10, Atari came out, and you had Atari, and it may have been 2 or 3 games, and you could only play that so much. And so cartoons came on 8 in the morning, and then about 4 or 5 in the afternoon, and that was it. At 12 o'clock, the TV just shut down. You had the snow on it, and then you had those colored bars, and sometimes you'd get the national anthem. That was a wrap. It wasn't no stand up all night watching TV. So our fun had to be created in our minds. We weren't being entertained. We were our own entertainment. And so it caused us to do things that I think led to us to be a little more independent at an earlier age, because we would go out, we would set up football games, kickball games. Hey, we're going to go ride our bikes. So we'd have to go knock on each other's doors. We didn't have cell phones or to text somebody and say, hey, let's go play. You had to literally go knock on the door and say, hey, can, Bobby come out and play? And if Bobby was in trouble, his mom would say, no, he can't come out and play. And so you go to the next door and the next friend, and then you get them all together, and then we start playing. And another thing about that time too, is that we learned how to resolve our own problems. I mean, we get out, we be hard and plan, and we get into a fight. We scrap, and 10 minutes later, we up and we back to friends like nothing happened. Whereas I see today, when kids get in a fight, 10 minutes later, they may be all right, but the parents are involved and engaged, and it becomes something much bigger than it needed to be. Yeah. So it was a different time in terms of how we interacted, and our parents allowed us to interact in that way and allowed us to solve our problems. They'd say, well, go outside and play. You figure it out. They didn't know I'm entertaining you. I'm at home, or I got to go to work. I'm tired. I'm not here, and I'm not your entertainment. Yeah. You're going to figure out how you're going to be entertained. Because if you come in here, you're going to do some cleaning up. You're going to do some work. And we figured that out real quick. That ain't what we wanted to do. So we got out of the house and we played.
I think 2 things is, one, when you talked about, when kids, back in your days, kids would, get an argument, fight or whatever, and that was it. You'd be fine 10 minutes later and nothing else was really thought of it. I think nowadays when we live so segmented, like I said, like if I got in a fight with a kid around the corner, you don't know his family, you don't know his parents. I think it may have been a little more tension, and I know you were raised different, so maybe not so much with you, but I'm just saying with kids today, it's like you don't know the person who lives around the corner. If I know, your mom and we're cool, whatever, and you kids get into a fight, y'all 10 years old, you know what I mean? I'm gonna just go talk to her, hey, they got into a fight, no problem, whatever. But if I don't know them, there's a lack of, I guess, connection there. And I can see where it causes tension in, those, families or those neighborhoods today if something like that comes up. But 2, also I wanted to get into the technology and stuff, because that's something I wasn't big on. I wasn't a huge video game kid, or I did like watching TV. I was a big kid. I liked to watch TV. It was, I guess, simple, so to speak. But I think that made it almost a little tougher for me because I wasn't huge on video games, and that's something that so many boys my age wanted to do at that time. And I was just like, I guess, you know what I mean? Maybe a few games an hour, and I was like, all right, I'm kind of done with this. So that made it a little difficult for me, I think, to find people to play with, constantly or, day in and day out, because they always wanted to do that. And I was like, all right, well, y'all can go over there and do that. I'll go back to my house, I guess. And when I got home, it was like, well, what else is there to do but watch TV or relax? So it made it a little difficult, I think. Because I don't know, I mean, growing up, I was a pretty outdoorsy kid. I liked being outside. I liked climbing trees, doing stuff like that. But, you can only do so much alone. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I noticed as a young kid, you had different interests. You seemed to be more introspective. You were able to hold pretty in-depth conversation. And I could see that sometimes when you were playing with some of the other kids, you would kind of lose interest because you just seemed to be, had another thought process, a little more advanced. And not saying you weren't a kid, but I can just tell at an early age, you kind of thought ahead and you begin to look at things from a different perspective, which was always cool. I remember as a little kid, I would sometimes take you some meetings and places that I would go. And I often would ask you after, we left and, start asking you questions. What do you think about this? What do you think about this person? And you were able to, explain what you saw. You could describe the persons, their mannerisms, and, all these different things and their characteristics. And I was like, wow, I didn't even notice that. So I could see where at times you were in a space where you were too young to be with the older group, but kind of a little more advanced to be with some of the kids your age. And you kind of developed a sense of gravitating to certain kids. You didn't have a lot of people that you hung out with. Yeah. And you still do that now, to where certain people that you click with, certain people, you'll associate with, but, it's certain few people that, these are your people when you hang with them tough and you keep in touch with them. So I always found that pretty interesting about you.
Yeah, no, I keep my circle tight. That's for sure. Ever since I was a kid, apparently. I think that's something I didn't notice about myself as a kid because, like I said, I was just a kid. I think there were times where I knew there were certain kids where I was like, all right, you know what I mean? This dude, I don't know what he talking about. I'm gonna be over here. But for the most part, I felt like there were certain people that I was cool spending time with. Certain people I was like, whatever, so to speak. But that leads me to my next question, which is like, what, growing up where we grew up and things like that, what would you say was your biggest life lesson you took from, the time you spent or just your childhood and growing up there in general?
My big life lesson was really to learn how to interact with a diverse group of people. And that largely came from the Boys and Girls Club. At the time, it was called the Boys Club. So the girls weren't really allowed to come. So during that time, it was to where you would come to the club and you had anyone from 7 years old to 17, 18. And it wasn't divided the way it is today, where you have the teen center and then you have the areas where the smaller youth play and, do their thing. It was just you played in the game room with the older children or youth. You went into the gym, you played basketball, dodgeball, one-step murder ball. You did all that, and if you could hang, you go out and play. If you could, you find your spot, away from the older kids. And so I learned how to navigate. And when I saw people that looking like they had my best interest at heart, I knew how to maneuver and stay away from them. And so my first day at the club, I remember vividly, it was Peppy, Big Pep. I love Pep, but you coming in, you naive. I'm 7, 8, and he coming, hey man, you got a quarter? Yeah, I'm thinking, I got a quarter. I give him a quarter, and I'm thinking, he gonna give me my quarter back. I still ain't got that quarter. So I begin to learn that when I go in there and I ain't big enough to fight some of these dudes, I would put my money in my socks. I would keep everything to where I was like, when they come, I ain't got nothing, because they'll pat you down and they wouldn't harass you, but they wouldn't allow anybody else to harass you. So it was one of those weird relationships where you were like, these are my friends, but they're going to shake me down, but they're not going to let nobody else shake me down. Yeah. So that's where some of my big life lessons is to learn how to interact with people from all, backgrounds. And if you see some of my friends now, you got some from the corporate world down to, you're like, Dad, you know this guy?
It's interesting you brought up the club because obviously we both went to the club. I mean, like you said, it was a lot different when you went. It was no girls. It was obviously a long time ago. But my experience with the club was different. I went when I was younger, and I think I had a good time with, like I said, my cousins. We'd walk from my grandma's to the club. And I was really young, but like I said, when I got to around 10 or 11-ish, that kind of dispersed. The older kids stopped going to the club, and some of my other cousins didn't. So I was like, I'm not too interested in the club no more. But then when I got into high school, I had to do volunteer work. And so I decided to go to the club. And I ended up going back after my freshman year of college, and I worked at the club that summer. So my experience, I think, was a little different, but it's also the same because you worked at the club as you were a teenager, right?
Yeah.
So I looked at it differently. I saw those kids doing what you were doing, learning how to navigate life or, these relationships with other kids from all different backgrounds. And it was an interesting perspective. I think I got my experience of learning how to navigate life and, deal with people from different backgrounds from school, like, most kids do. But I went through, my schooling was so different because I went to different areas for school, so to speak. And I was really young, and I was going to preschool at what was it, Wonderland Angel in what city was it? Compton, California. So, obviously an extremely different crowd there, different kids, different teachers. I think, and it's funny because I think that's the only time I've ever had a black teacher was, preschool. I don't know if you really call him a teacher. It was really babysitting, but that was the only time I had a teacher who looked like me. And like you said, they treated us different. It was almost like that auntie who could kind of slap you upside your head and really keep you in line. You know what I mean? And so that was a different experience. And then I came back and going to kindergarten, all of my teachers were different backgrounds and, obviously a different crowd of kids because we moved from LA to the Coachella Valley, which is mostly Latinx community. So it was a big difference. And so then middle school and elementary school were, kind of the same. But then high school, I go to Xavier College Prep, which is a, Jesuit Catholic high school. I think the 1% in the Valley, so to speak, that's where they went. You know what I mean? You had the rich kids. That's where they was at. And so I got so many different backgrounds growing up. I think that really prepared me to interact with all kind of walks of life. So,
yeah. No, that was the experience I often thought about raising you guys up out here. Even though the black community was a small portion of the population when I grew up, we stayed in the same neighborhood. So we was always in contact, even though we went out to school and we were often, one or two of us in a classroom. So we were isolated in certain instances, but when we came back to the neighborhood, we were all, able to see each other and reconnect. And so that kept, to me, some semblance of being a part of your culture and not feeling so isolated, which today I see differently with your younger sister and even with you guys being in a neighborhood where, was few kids that look like you, few black families. We still had a few cousins and people in the area, but having that immersion and being, doused with, hey, this is my family, this is my people. So when I go outside, there's that connection. But I think in general today, neighborhoods are not like they used to be, where, kids don't really go outside and play regardless of their, cultural background, their nationality or racial makeup. It's just that, more into the technology, more inside. And so it's a different feel. And so I always say, and maybe just me being nostalgic, kind of feel sorry for this generation because some of the experiences I had were really cool. Yeah. And I always think, man, I wish, these kids could experience some of those things that I experienced.
And I think it's interesting because I think that's what got people in neighborhoods to kind of come together really back in the day. If you weren't related to the people in your neighborhood, you guys' dynamic was different. But in neighborhoods across America, it was, hey, my kid and your kid are kind of the same age. Let's have them play together. And now I'm getting a relationship with, the mom and the people next door or down the street because our kids are playing together and stuff like that. Whereas now so many kids are in the house, I don't really have a reason to go talk to, Joe Smo down the street. And not to mention your generation is getting sucked into the technology a little bit too. Y'all, y'all like to talk about us, but y'all definitely getting good on the phones and Facebook, and y'all don't see y'all interacting as much in person anyway. So it's just I guess the day and age we live in now is things are changing, and that's kind of the way it's going. So
yeah, it's definitely a change.
I wanted to talk about, and I think I've always thought this was so interesting growing up, and it was a really weird dynamic. And I wanted to ask you, it's like, so you growing up, you didn't have a father in the household. Your dad, I don't know. I'll let you tell more about him. I don't know. That's the thing. I don't know anything about him. He lives really where we live, I guess.
Right.
I don't see him very much. I'll see him walking down the street, and I've never really spoken to him. But it was always interesting to me when I first realized growing up, like, man, my father didn't really have a father. But yet I feel like he's doing such a great job raising me. I was like, where did he get this from? Like, how does you know how to raise somebody as a father if you didn't have that, role model as you were growing up? I've always been interested in wanting to ask that.
Well, for me, I just kind of applied the things that I wish I would have. So if I had a dad, I wish we could have done this. I wish we would have had these type of discussions and these type of interactions. So I always wanted to, do the things that I wanted, what I expected from my father. Having a conversation. Literally, I think if I was to count in hours, the amount of conversations I had with my dad, it would probably be under an hour. I mean, I would go, I'd see him because he stayed with my grandmother and I was always at her house. So I see him, I knew who he was, but it was a weird dynamic because I knew it was my father. He knew I was his child, but there was no real interaction. I remember though vividly when I was about 3, I was pretty young, and he would take us out, him and my sister Serena, and we would go to the store. And I remember one time vividly, and Serena and I still talk about this. We went into the store, we went and said, hey, I want to get this, this, and this. He said, yeah, grab it. So we went, we picked up what we were going to get, some chips or whatever it is. And we started walking out of the store. And we 3 and 4 years old. We like, hey, ain't you gonna pay for this? He said, no, let's go. And so we just kept walking out. So I remember that experience vividly. And the one time when we went on vacation, we were pretty young and he was there. But other than that, we didn't really have a whole lot of interactions. I mean, we knew who he was, we saw him, but it wasn't a whole lot of, discussions and just talking the way you and I do. Yeah. And so I always wanted to have that relationship with not only my son, but with other males, because that was something that I saw as and I didn't realize it till I got older, but that was a void in my life, to have a male figure that I could ask questions, to feel protected, to feel like, somebody got my back. Yeah. But my grandmothers and my mother, they did a great job of making sure that I had everything I needed. But that male presence, was something that, I lacked.
I think you got it a little bit and in kind of spurts, I guess, in your life, really. I think when you talk about your interaction with Papa Andy, and Papa Lewis, and them taking you fishing, camping, and they're your grandfathers, but you kind of had that, I guess, father-son relationship with them. And then when you talk about people that you met at the boys club,
right? The
older staff, Grady,
Dave.
Yeah, so some of those people, I think you kind of got it, but it wasn't in your home, so to speak.
Yeah, it wasn't that I know that this is the person I can go to for anything. Yeah. Like for those people I can go to for certain things. And because my grandfather was a lot older and at that time I was a lot younger, so their energy level wasn't to mine. So our interactions were good, but it wasn't a lot of actions. Yeah. As far as activity, we go fishing, do something that was a little more slow. And being a younger kid, I was kind of moving and bouncing around. So the age difference made it to where it was somewhat challenging, but I definitely revered them for being there and showing me the things that they showed me. Because my Papa Andy was very old school, man. He had me out there building stuff, and I'm scratching my head like, man, I don't want to do this. Jacking up cars and changing oil and stuff like that, which as I got older, I appreciated. But as a young kid, I was like, man, I want to be running around and playing. I don't want to be jacking up this truck. And he had an old truck. I remember it was a Ford. It was old. It was so old that the truck, the bottom of it, you could see the ground. So the floor of the car, you could see the ground. And we would go to the dump. I mean, he had us working, and we had a calf. And
a calf?
A baby calf. It was in the backyard.
A
cow, yeah. And we would get up in the morning when I spent a night over there, and we would feed it. So we would create a bottle. We put milk and oatmeal and stuff in it, and we would feed it. And then all of a sudden, the calf was gone. and so You know, as a kid, I never thought about it. It was just one of those things you just kind of like, oh, it's gone. You know,
I'd never heard.
You know, we probably ate that thing.
I have never heard that story.
Yeah. So
the reason I brought that up is because I think, obviously, in your generation, there was a lot of Black kids who didn't have fathers in the home. You know, it was mothers and grandmothers really raising Black kids, and especially young Black males in your generation. And I guess, I don't know statistics on it or anything like that, but I think you see a lot of that carry over to the next generation where they're struggling to really, you know, be good fathers, I think. And there's a disconnect because they didn't have that. But I will say I'm impressed with, I think, you and a few other people that you grew up with that kind of had the same situation as you. I think as well as y'all could have done, y'all have done a great job of being fathers despite not having that role model in the home. So I guess I'm giving you some props for that.
Well, thank you, man. We tried. We learned from the mistakes of our fathers, and yeah, I think all of my friends, if I'm not mistaken, either have a good relationship with their children or they're married to the children's mother, and so they're in the homes with their sons and daughters. So I often think about that, and we often sometimes talk about it, and it's like, wow, it's interesting that we grew up without our fathers being in the house, but we have been able to make sure that we stay connected with our children. So that's an interesting thought, interesting dynamic.
I want to end it with, I want you to give me a few simple experiences and people that you believe shaped your life. A few simple ones or stories or specific people and what they did for you. And then I'll give mine as well.
Well, I would say definitely one, my mom. I mean, she was strict and she made sure I stayed in line. She wasn't no joke. And my two grandmothers were very different, but very similar. Like on one hand, Momo, you know Momo, she was rough with you, but she had a really big heart. I mean, I remember many times growing up having cousins and relatives, and then sometimes people that I didn't even know that I was sharing a room with, you know, because she would let them come in. So as her sisters and other family members moved to the area, she would allow them to have a place to stay until they got themselves together and they moved out. Yeah. So she had a big heart, but she wasn't no joke. She would get you. All of my friends, they were like, man, I'm not coming over your house. Your grandma? Nah, I ain't playing with her. My other grandmother on my dad's side, she was very loving and affectionate, Granny Josie. Mm-hmm. And so, you know, that was the one I can kind of really talk to in a way that I didn't talk to with my mom and Momo. Although I know they loved me and I know that they would do anything, Granny was the one I could like share certain things with. And, you know, she would be able to kind of have that conversation and more of an affectionate relationship, so to speak. Those three were really the pillars in my life and kind of made me the person that I am. The club itself, like I said earlier, allowed me to learn how to navigate through different experiences, different individuals, different backgrounds. But sports was the one thing that really changed my life. It made me focus more. If it wasn't for sports, I wouldn't have had no interest in school. I went to school because my mom and first of all, they made me go, and I couldn't play sports if my grades weren't good. So I did well in school most of the time and when I had interest, but I always did enough to where I stayed out of trouble and I was able to play sports. So those are the things that really impacted me growing up and really shaped, you know, my worldview. And of course, family, just those experiences being around family and friends, the music and just the culture at that time to me was just so rich. And, you know, even today I feel that and I, you know, reminisce on it and I want to build and replicate those communities that I grew up in, obviously improving the socioeconomic conditions, but having that same kind of environment and feel to it.
Yeah. For me, I'm trying to think. I mean, I think for me, the people, because like you said, I didn't have a real group of friends that I stuck with throughout my entire childhood, so to speak. There were people that came in and I rode with for a while, and then for whatever reason, they kind of were out the picture. I think my family was the people that were really close to me because I was kind of all over the place. Even, I went to the club and then I kind of didn't. So I didn't get any really strong relationships with the staff there. And so the only people that were really consistent, I guess, was my family in terms of you, Mom, my older sister, and then when Malia came later. So those are the people that I feel like had the biggest influence on my life, along with my grandparents, aunts, uncles, and cousins. So really just my immediate family are the people. But I think one thing that we share in common is the sports aspect. I love sports. It's really what I want to do with my life. And so that was the thing. And not that I was in school for sports, because y'all wasn't playing that. I was going to be in school and my grades was going to be at least pretty good. But I definitely learned so much from sports. That's where I met most of the friends that, at least I hung out with somewhat. Right. And, sports was the great equalizer for me in everything. So I think that's one common experience that we share and really, really shaped who we are. So,
yeah. And there's a couple of people that I think, obviously my sisters, Serena and Lorraine, just in terms of growing up, Lorraine was a lot younger than us. It's kind of like you and Malia, where it was Serena the oldest and myself, and then Lorraine was about 9-10 years younger than us. But we were always together, and man, we had some really interesting times and some things that we did and got in trouble for. So, they were very instrumental. And then as I got older in life, your mother being a very instrumental figure. And I always tell her that because I'm an extreme person and people don't realize that. I'm either very mellow, laid back, but when I shift, that switch go off, I'm over 100 and nobody understand how he got there. So I always tell her that, if I hadn't married her or we hadn't been together, I'd probably be either filthy rich or dead broke, because I'm all in. It's like, I'm going all in and we're going to see what happens. So she's really kind of helped keep me balanced and, kind of walking down the middle of the lane. And, she's always supported me in doing the different things that I do. As you know, I'm always trying to create, build, and
thinking of a master plan.
Yeah. So, she's kind of like, she gives that look when I come to her and say, hey, babe, I got this idea. This is what I want to do. She gives you that look that, what is this? So
here we go again.
Yeah. So, but she's always there, support and making sure she's holding down. So she's really, in that regard, been the backbone of our family and making sure things at home, stay intact. And so those are the people in my life, and obviously my kids.
Yeah. No, I think this was a good discussion just to really break down the similarities and differences between your upbringing and my upbringing. And I think we have the unique situation of other families may not. I mean, there may be a lot that do across the country, but we grew up in the exact same area, realistically, the same exact city. So we saw a lot of the same things, but obviously it was so different because it was 30, 40 years apart. You know what I mean?
Right.
But to discuss the similarities and differences was, I think, a good conversation. So with that being said, I appreciate everyone for tuning in to another episode, and stay tuned for the next one.
All right. Peace. Keep getting up, laying down.
All right. Glad we could take a moment to put you up on game. The show is available every Sunday morning on Apple Podcasts, SoundCloud, Spotify, and other platforms. Now you know. Peace.